With his last $2, a broken cowboy and his giant horse bought an entire ghost town. They thought they had bought a graveyard of dreams, until the horse discovered a secret worth $200 million. This is their story. Jedediah Stone was a man walking in the shadow of ghosts. The ghost of his wife, Sarah, her laughter like wind chimes in a breeze that no longer blew. The ghost of his daughter, Emily, her small hand once held tightly in his. Both taken by a single, merciless fire that had consumed his ranch and devoured his entire world. He was a hollowed-out survivor, his heart a landscape of ash, with nothing to his name but the clothes on his back, 2 tarnished silver dollars in his pocket, and the magnificent giant horse that was his only friend. Titan, a great Blackshire cross, was the last living piece of his old life, a 4-legged testament to a past so vibrant it now felt like a dream. The horse's quiet, intelligent presence was the only thing that kept the crushing silence from swallowing Jed whole. They had drifted for months, hunger a constant, gnawing companion. Now, they had reached the town of Prosperity, a name that felt like a cruel, twisted joke spat in the face of his misfortune. Jed's plan was the final act of a desperate man, a heartbreaking surrender. He would sell Titan. The thought was a physical pain, a dagger twisting in his gut. But the $2 in his pocket were a stark, cold reality. They were not enough to feed a man, let alone a horse of such immense, noble size. He would sell his only friend, the last echo of his lost family, to give them both a few more weeks of survival. He led the horse to the polished oak doors of the town's most powerful man, the banker and land baron, Silas Kane. Kane was a man with a smile as slick as oil and eyes as cold and hard as a winter river. He stepped onto the boardwalk, his gaze sweeping over Titan's powerful form with an appraiser's cold calculation, then landing on Jed's desperate, ragged appearance. Kane's smile widened. He would not buy the horse. He had a different kind of deal in mind, a deal dripping with the sweet poison of condescension and cruelty. He spoke of a ghost town he owned, a place rotting out in the Badlands called Calico Creek. A town, he sneered, that was cursed by a failed silver rush, abandoned by God, and, most importantly, completely and utterly without water. He offered to sell the entire town, all its rotten buildings and dusty, worthless land, to Jed. The price? $2. Everything he had. It was not an act of charity. It was a spectacle of power, an act of public humiliation designed to exile this broken man to a place where he would surely perish. A final, forgotten footnote in the grand story of the West. Trapped, with the eyes of the town upon him and no other options, Jed accepted. He signed the deed, the 2 silver dollars, the last remnants of his old life passing from his trembling hand to Kane's manicured one. He had not sold his horse. But as he led Titan out of town towards the Badlands, he feared he had just condemned them both to a slow, lonely, and thirsty death. Calico Creek was worse than he had imagined. It was a skeleton, its buildings bleached and crumbling under the sun, the wind whistling through empty windows like the mournful spirits of the miners who had lost their fortunes here. A wave of absolute, soul-crushing despair washed over Jed. Kane was right. This was a graveyard. He slumped to the ground, the last of his strength, his last flicker of hope, draining away into the dry, cracked earth. This was it, the end of the line. But Titan, who had stood patiently beside him through everything, did not seem to share his despair. The great horse's head was up, his ears swiveling, his powerful nostrils flaring as if tasting something on the wind that Jed could not perceive. This was the first hint of something more. Instead of seeking the meager shade of a collapsing barn, Titan ignored Jed's weary call. The horse began to walk with a strange, new purpose, nudging Jed with his massive head, pulling him forward. He led him away from the main street, away from the rotten buildings, towards a low, dry basin at the edge of the town, a place that looked even more barren and lifeless than the rest. The ground was cracked and hard as stone. Titan stopped in the center of the basin, lowered his massive head, and sniffed the ground intently. Then, he did something truly bizarre. He began to paw at the earth, his powerful front hoof, the size of a dinner plate, striking the hard-packed dirt with a rhythmic, determined thud. Jed stared, bewildered. His horse, the only creature he trusted in this world, seemed to have gone mad. But as he watched, a tiny, insane flicker of hope ignited in his chest. The horse was not acting randomly. It was digging, it was trying to tell him something. And in a town where he had nothing left to lose, he decided, for one last time, to trust his only friend. For what felt like an hour, Jed simply watched, the blistering sun beating down on him. Every rational part of his mind told him this was foolishness. But then, the horse stopped. Titan let out a low, guttural whinny, a sound of deep, guttural insistence, and looked directly at Jed, his intelligent eyes burning with an unmistakable message. "Help me. Dig here." And in that moment, something shifted in Jedediah. He owed him this. He owed him one last act of faith. With a weary groan, he grabbed the only tool he had, a rusty spade from his old wagon, and he began to dig. The ground was like iron. Each shovelful was a battle. He worked for hours, his hands blistering, his back screaming in protest. Titan stood beside him, a silent, watchful sentinel, occasionally nudging his shoulder. As the sun began to dip towards the horizon, Jed was about to give up, to collapse from sheer exhaustion, when a spade hit something different. Not the familiar crunch of dry earth, but a soft, damp thud. His heart leaped. He dropped to his knees and clawed at the ground with his bare hands. The soil was cool and dark, damp. He dug faster, a wild, primal energy surging through him. And then he saw it. A tiny, miraculous trickle of water seeping up from the earth. He had broken through to a shallow water table. It wasn't a river, but it was life. He dug with a renewed fury, widening the hole, and soon a small, muddy pool of clean, clear water began to form. Titan plunged his muzzle into the pool and drank deeply. Jed laughed, a raw, cracked sound he hadn't made in years. He splashed the cool water on his own face, letting it wash away the dust and the despair. Silas Kane had lied. The town was not cursed. It was just waiting. And for the first time in a very long time, Jedediah Stone felt like he was no longer waiting to die, but beginning to live. The discovery of water was the discovery of a future. It was the foundation upon which a new life could be built. The days that followed were no longer filled with the aimless wandering of a grieving man, but with the simple, satisfying ache of hard, purposeful work. Jedediah Stone, the broken survivor, was replaced by Jedediah Stone, the builder. He chose the old blacksmith shop as their new home. It was the sturdiest building in the desolate town, with a solid stone foundation and a forge that, with enough sweat and determination, could be brought back to life. He and Titan became an inseparable team. The great horse, his strength returning with daily access to fresh water and the surprising discovery of a patch of resilient grama grass, became his partner in labor. With ropes and pulleys of Jed's own design, Titan would help drag heavy timbers to reinforce the collapsing roof. His immense power, doing the work of 10 men. Jed would talk to him constantly as they worked, his voice no longer a murmur of sad memories, but a running conversation between partners, filled with plans, quiet observations, and the occasional, gruffly affectionate command. He was not just rebuilding a shelter. He was rebuilding his own soul. One plank, one stone, one carefully measured cut at a time. They worked from sunup to sundown. Jed repaired the roof, cleared the overgrown yard of weeds and debris, and using the precious water from their small, hand-dug well, he started a vegetable garden. It was a defiant patch of vibrant green in a world of monotonous brown, a testament to their shared will to live. The ghosts of his past, of Sarah and Emily, still whispered to him in the quiet of the night, but now their voices were softer. The sharp edges of his grief were being worn smooth by the sounds of his own hammer, of a horse's contented sigh, of life returning to a dead place. He had found a purpose again. He was no longer just surviving. He was building. A month passed, and the rhythm of their new life became as steady as the prairie wind. The small well provided enough water for them and the garden. But Jed, a man who had learned from harsh experience, knew that to truly survive the coming winter, He needed a more reliable, deeper source. He decided it was time to dig a proper, stone-lined well, a permanent anchor for the life he was building, a fortress against the droughts and hardships he knew would come. He chose to expand the original hole Titan had discovered, believing the horse's instincts had led him to the best spot on the entire property. He worked for days, hauling up bucket after bucket of damp earth, his muscles burning with the satisfying ache of progress. Titan was his constant shadow, watching from the edge of the pit, occasionally snorting as if offering his approval. It was on the third day of digging, when he was about 10 feet down, his world, a small circle of earth and sky, that his shovel struck something that was not rock and not earth. It made a dull, soft thud. Curious, Jed cleared the surrounding dirt. He had hit a layer of thick, dark, almost greasy clay, a type of shale he had never seen before in this territory. It felt strangely out of place. As he dug deeper into the strange layer, he noticed a peculiar, pungent smell, a scent like bitumen and tar. He had smelled it once before, years ago, when a traveling salesman, a charlatan in a fancy suit, had demonstrated a new miracle lantern fuel. He dismissed it as a geological anomaly and continued to dig. The well was for water, nothing more. But the further down he went, the stronger the smell became, and the thicker the oily residue on his shovel. One afternoon, after a particularly strenuous session of digging, he left his spade resting against the side of the pit and climbed out to get a drink of water. As he turned back, a glint of sunlight reflecting off the metal spade caught his eye. The blade, which had been deep in the oily shale, was now covered in a slick, black, viscous liquid that dripped slowly, thickly, onto the ground below. He stared at it, his mind racing. He remembered the old stories from the boomtowns, the whispered tales of black gold, of a substance that could burn brighter and longer than any whale oil. He had always dismissed them as tall tales, the desperate dreams of failed prospectors. But here, in his own well, was the undeniable proof. He scooped up a handful of the black liquid. It was thick, slippery, and smelled of the earth's deepest secrets. He carried it to his forge, which he had recently repaired. With a trembling hand, he dipped a piece of wood into the substance and held it to the flame. It didn't just burn, it erupted in a bright, steady, almost smokeless flame that was far more powerful than simple wood fire. A wave of disbelief washed over him. Silas Kane had not just lied about the water. He had lied about everything. This land wasn't worthless. It was the opposite of worthless. He hadn't just found a way to survive. He had stumbled upon a fortune. The discovery of oil changed the very nature of Jed's work. The well was no longer just for water. It was a portal to a hidden world. Driven by a feverish curiosity, a prospector's fire, he thought long extinguished, he began to dig again, not for water, but to see how deep the deposit went. He worked with a new, frantic energy, the promise of a different future driving him forward. As he dug deeper, the ground beneath him began to feel strange. He could feel a low, deep vibration through the handle of his spade, a subtle hum of immense pressure building far below. Titan, who had been grazing peacefully nearby, suddenly became agitated. The great horse trotted to the edge of the pit, its ears pinned back, its nostrils flaring, letting out a low, nervous whinny. It was a clear, urgent warning. But Jed, caught in the grip of his discovery, ignored it. He raised his heavy pickaxe for one more strike, aiming for a large piece of shale at the bottom of the pit. The moment the pickaxe struck, a deep, guttural roar erupted from the earth. The ground shook violently, knocking Jed off his feet. Titan reared back, screaming in terror. And then, it happened. The bottom of the pit exploded upwards. A massive, roaring column of thick, black oil. A gusher erupted from the hole, shooting 50 feet into the air with the force of a cannon. It blotted out the sun, raining down in a black torrent, covering Jed, the ground, and everything around in a slick, dark coat. Jed scrambled out of the pit, choking, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and pure, unadulterated awe. He stared at the roaring black fountain, a monster of unimaginable power and wealth that had been sleeping beneath his feet. And in that moment, the final plot twist clicked into place in his mind. He looked at Titan, who was now standing at a safe distance, watching the spectacle. He finally understood. The horse had never sensed the oil. It had only sensed the water that lay above it. It was the horse's simple, honest quest for survival that had accidentally led him to this. It was not greed, not a treasure hunt, but a simple act of trust in his only friend that had unlocked the greatest fortune in the territory. The curse of Calico Creek was a lie, and its greatest secret had just been revealed to the entire world. The Black Fountain of Calico Creek was a declaration of war. It was a beacon, visible for miles, a roaring black flag planted in the heart of the desolate prairie, announcing the end of a long-held secret. And in the town of Prosperity, Silas Kane saw it. He stood on the wrought iron balcony of his bank, a spyglass pressed to his eye, his handsome face contorted into a mask of pure, murderous fury. The broken-down fool he had exiled to die had not just survived. He had stumbled blindly upon the very treasure Kane had been scheming to acquire for years. Kane had known about the oil. Old geological surveys, bought cheap from a failed expedition, had hinted at a massive reservoir beneath the Badlands. But its exact location was a mystery. He had spent years buying up the surrounding land for pennies on the dollar, carefully spreading and nurturing the rumors of a curse and a lack of water to keep prying eyes away, planning to eventually claim the ghost town for himself when the time was right. Jedediah's desperate act, his simple trust in a thirsty horse, had ruined everything. Now, with the secret roaring into the sky for all the world to see, Kane knew the game of whispers and lies was over. The time for brute force had come. He gathered his hired guns, ruthless men who valued coin over conscience, and rode out, not to negotiate, but to eliminate the problem and reclaim his prize. Back at the ranch, Jedediah knew they were coming. He stood, covered in the slick, black rain of his newfound fortune, and felt not joy, but a cold, heavy dread. This discovery had not brought him peace. It had brought him a new kind of war, a war he was hopelessly unprepared to fight. He and Titan were alone. He was one man, his fighting skills dulled by years of trying to forget the battlefield, against a small army of hired killers. As the sun began to set, casting a blood-red glow on the black gusher, he saw the dust cloud on the horizon. They were coming. He looked at Titan, his loyal friend, the source of all his new hope and all his new danger. He could run. They could try to escape into the Badlands, to disappear once more into the anonymous wilderness. But as he looked at the blacksmith shop he had started to rebuild, at the small, defiant garden he had nurtured, at the well that had given them life, he knew, with a certainty that solidified his spine, that he was done running. Kane and his men rode into the town, their rifles drawn, their faces grim and confident. They expected to find a lone, terrified man, easy to dispose of. They found something else. Jedediah was not hiding. He was waiting for them in the middle of the main street, a lit torch held steadily in his hand, his face calm, his eyes burning with a cold, hard light they did not recognize. "Stone, you've been trespassing on my property. That deed is a worthless piece of paper. Leave now, and I might let you live. This is my land, Kane. I paid the price you asked. That was the price for you to die, not to get rich." Kane gave a sharp, impatient signal to his men. As they raised their rifles, Jedediah made his all-in move. This was a battle he could not win with bullets. He had to win it with the very substance they had come to steal. He had to win it with fire and fear. He turned and, with a powerful, arching throw, he hurled the torch. It did not land near the men. It landed in the massive, spreading pool of crude oil that had collected at the base of the gusher. The world exploded into a wall of fire. A terrifying, roaring inferno erupted from the ground, encircling the gusher and shooting flames 100 feet into the sky. The heat was a physical blow, the sound a deafening roar that shook the very foundations of the crumbling town. The horses of Kane's men screamed in a primal terror they had never known, rearing and bucking, throwing their riders into the slick, oily mud. The hired guns, who had come for an easy payday, were now trapped in a fiery, suffocating hellscape. Their organized attack devolved into a panicked, every man for himself scramble for survival. In the heart of the chaos, Jed and Titan moved as one. They were not warriors, but they were survivors. They used the fire and the panic, the terrifying silhouettes of the burning gusher, to drive the scattered gunmen away from the town. Kane, his fine suit now covered in oil and mud, his face a mask of disbelief and terror, was left alone, his power and his plan reduced to ash. Defeated and humiliated, he fled into the night, the roaring fire of Calico Creek a monument to his own greed. 5 years later, the ghost town of Calico Creek was a memory. In its place stood Titan's Hope, a thriving, prosperous community built on the black gold that lay beneath it. The town was known not for its wealth, but for its character, its fair wages, its clean water, and its honest dealings. And at the heart of it all was Jedediah Stone, no longer a broken man running from ghosts, but a respected and beloved leader, his quiet wisdom the bedrock of the community. He was one of the wealthiest men in the territory, but he still lived in the old blacksmith shop he had first repaired, a constant reminder of his humble beginnings. He had never lost the humility that his journey had taught him. His greatest treasure was not the oil that flowed from the ground, but the peace he had finally found within himself. Every evening, he would walk to the edge of the now bustling town, to a large, green pasture reserved only for the town's founder. There, he would stand with his old friend, Titan, the great black horse, now enjoying a well-earned retirement of green grass and endless apples, would nuzzle his shoulder. They would stand together, the man and the horse, and watch the sunset over the town they had built. Jedediah never forgot that his entire fortune, his second chance at life, had not come from a lucky strike or a clever deal. It had come from a single act of trust in a loyal friend, in a town he had bought for $2. He had come seeking a place to die, and instead, a giant horse had shown him, and an entire community, how to live.